My name is Eleanor Hayes, and for most of my life, I believed that order could protect you. Order in numbers, in cupboards, in conversations. If everything added up neatly, nothing terrible could slip through the cracks. That was my mistake. Life doesn't balance, it rounds down when you least expect it. The morning my husband, Tom, died was unremarkable in every way that mattered. March sunlight on the kitchen tiles, the tick of the wall clock, the faint scent of burnt toast because I'd been reading receipts at the table instead of watching the grill. Tom was humming some half-remembered tune from the 60s, while folding the newspaper to the crossword page. 17 across, he said. 6 letters. Means dependable. Steady, I replied without looking up. He chuckled. That's you, Ellie. Always steady. It was the last thing he ever said. Later, when the ambulance men carried him out and the kettle was still warm on the counter, I remember thinking how absurd it was that something as fragile as a heart could end a life that had been so ordinary and solid. The cup of tea he never finished sat there for days before I could bear to pour it away. 2 weeks after the funeral, grief, I discovered, is not a storm but a fog. It doesn't rage, it lingers. I moved through rooms as though underwater, signing insurance forms, answering kind but exhausting phone calls, thanking neighbors for casseroles I couldn't taste. At night I would open the ledger Tom had used for his small delivery business. Columns of figures, tidy as ever. A man's life reduced to numbers that no longer meant anything. I told myself I'd close the business properly, settle the bills, sell the van. I even believed it for a while. The first crack appeared when the bank statement arrived. The balance was lower than I expected. Not disastrously, just wrong. A missing entry, a forgotten transfer. I prided myself on catching errors. Bookkeeping had been my trade for 30 years, but this was different. Tom's handwriting appeared on a loan document I'd never seen. Then another. And another. I spent an entire night at the kitchen table, spreading papers across the surface like an autopsy. By dawn, I knew the truth. The man who joked I could find a penny in a haystack had been quietly drowning in debt. The fall banks don't send condolences. They send letters printed in polite fonts that bruise you all the same. Outstanding balance. Overdue payment. Words that look harmless until you read them at 3 a.m. with a cup of cold tea and shaking hands. I sold Tom's van first. Then some jewelry I hadn't worn in years. Each transaction felt like cutting away a piece of our life together. Still, the totals refused to add up in my favor. A friend from church, kind, well-meaning, mentioned a man who could help restructure personal finances. His name was Richard Bell. He helped my cousin after her divorce, she said. Professional, discreet. Very understanding. Understanding. That was the word I was starving for. Richard Bell. He arrived at my office above the pharmacy wearing a navy suit and the kind of watch that catches light when you're uncertain where to look. His handshake was firm, his smile gentle. "Mrs. Hayes," he said, "you've been through so much. Let me take this burden off your shoulders." The relief was instant, foolishly sweet. Someone competent, someone who spoke the language of numbers as I did, yet offered warmth instead of judgment. I gave him everything: bank statements, mortgage papers, proof of income. He complimented my thoroughness. He called me sensible. He promised I wouldn't lose the house. For the first time in months, I slept through the night. 2 weeks later, my savings were gone. The bank clerk's voice was neutral, rehearsed. "The transfer was authorized, Mrs. Hayes. Signature matches yours." I stared at the paper. The name was mine, the curl of the E identical, but my hand had never written it. When I tried to call Richard, the number had vanished. The woman from church hadn't seen him since some conference up north. The police officer who took my statement looked barely old enough to shave. "These cases can be tricky," he said. "Fraud like this, it crosses jurisdictions." That night I sat on the kitchen floor amid boxes of paperwork and cried until my ribs hurt. I had balanced other people's books for decades, but I couldn't balance this, the equation of trust betrayed. The move selling the house was inevitable. It went for less than we'd hoped, more than I deserved, and the proceeds vanished into debt repayments and solicitors' fees before I could breathe. Now I live in a flat above a laundrette, the air perpetually scented with detergent and damp. The rent is just within my pension's reach. I tell people I chose the location because it's convenient. I don't tell them I chose it because it was the cheapest place that didn't smell of despair. Each morning, the hum of washing machines downstairs becomes my alarm clock. I make tea, count out tablets for my blood pressure, and open the window to let in the city's restless air. Sometimes I imagine Tom's voice drifting through the traffic. "You'll find a way, Ellie. You always do." I wish I still believed him. There's a small cafe on the corner where the coffee is weak and the company better than silence. The owner, Lena, calls everyone love and slips me a discount I pretend not to notice. I sit by the window, stretching a single cup for an hour, listening to conversations that remind me the world still turns. That's where I first noticed David, a man in his 50s, always with a newspaper, always alone. He nodded once, polite but distant. A few days later he offered me half his muffin. "Please," he said, when I hesitated. "Otherwise I'll feel wasteful." I smiled for the first time in weeks. The weight of letters despite everything, the letters still come, white envelopes heavy with threats dressed as formalities. I keep them in a shoebox under my bed. It's ridiculous, really, how something so small can feel so heavy. Sometimes, when the noise of the laundrette fills the air and the world outside feels too large, I open the box and trace the ink lines of my own name, as if to confirm I still exist. On those nights, I whisper to Tom in the dark. "I'm trying," I tell him. But the numbers don't make sense anymore. And in the faint hum of machines below, I pretend I hear him answer, then stop counting. "Ellie. Just keep breathing." Small mercies. The first thing I learned about living above a laundrette was that time had a rhythm again. Cycles of spin and rinse, the metallic slam of machine doors, the soft rush of steam escaping like breath. At first it felt intrusive, then it became comforting, proof that life continued below, even when mine seemed paused. One morning, as I wrestled with a bag of sheets at the top of the stairs, a voice called up from the shop. "You'll twist your back if you carry it like that." I looked down to see a woman in her 30s, dark hair tied back, sleeves rolled to her elbows. She held a basket hip high like a shield. "I'm stronger than I look," I said. She grinned. "Everyone says that right before they end up in my folding chair with a hot water bottle." Her name was Priya, and she ran the laundrette for her aunt. Within a week she decided I needed looking after. She began knocking on my door with half a loaf of bread, a spare tin of soup, or a story from one of her customers. At first, I tried to refuse, but she ignored polite boundaries like someone used to being needed. "You remind me of my mum," she said once. "She talks to her houseplants, though. You talk to the kettle." "I find the kettle listens better," I said, and she laughed. It was the kind of laugh that made the room feel less empty. On Mondays, I took my washing downstairs, and we'd chat while she fed coins into the machines. She told me about her brother at university, her aunt's arthritis, the constant battle with the dryer that overheated. Ordinary things. Safe things. In return, I told her fragments of my past, nothing about Tom or the scam at first, just small pieces, my old office job, the garden I used to keep, the cat we'd once had that brought home earthworms like trophies. Priya had a way of listening that made silence feel comfortable, not awkward. One afternoon she said, "You've had some kind of loss, haven't you?" I hesitated, then nodded. "Me too," she said softly. "Different kind, maybe. But I know the look." We didn't speak of it again, but the next time she handed me my clean laundry, she'd tucked a sprig of lavender into the folded towel. I still visited the cafe most mornings. David was often there before me, reading the paper like a man holding a shield against the world. One drizzly morning, he looked up as I passed his table. "Rain again," he said. "Makes London look like it's been crying all night." I smiled at the metaphor. Perhaps it needed to. He gestured to the seat opposite. Care to join me? It became a quiet ritual. We talked about inconsequential things, films neither of us had seen, the state of the buses, how coffee always tasted burnt in paper cups. He was careful not to pry, and I was grateful. There was something unspoken between us, a recognition of damage that didn't need translation. After a few weeks, I learned his wife had died 3 years earlier. Cancer. He still wore his wedding ring. I kept expecting grief to fade, he said once, staring into his mug. But it just changes shape. I wanted to tell him I understood, that mine had changed shape too, into debt, guilt, and a flat above a laundrette, but the words stuck. Instead, I said, "You're right. It's like an echo that keeps finding new walls." He smiled, faintly. Exactly. Despite these small connections, the nights were still the hardest. I woke often, heart racing from dreams where Tom was alive, sitting across from me at the table, asking where the money had gone. In those dreams, I never found an answer. Then, one Thursday, a new letter arrived. The envelope looked ordinary, white, windowed, stamped. Inside was a notice from a debt recovery agency I'd never heard of. They claimed I owed £4,217 on a loan I'd never taken. My hands trembled so badly I had to set the paper down. It didn't make sense. I'd closed every account, repaid every legitimate debt. My first thought was that Richard Bell had resurfaced somehow, using my details again. I sat for a long time before deciding to go to the council office in person. If there was another mess to clean, I needed to see it face to face. The building smelled of damp paper and bureaucracy. A woman at the reception desk directed me to debt services with a tone that implied I was the 100th that day. The waiting room was filled with people clutching envelopes, staring at their knees. When my number was called, I was shown into a cubicle where a young man in a cheap suit peered at a computer screen. His badge read Mr. S. Evans. He frowned. "This looks like a private creditor, not council issued. But the letterhead says in partnership with local authorities." He shrugged. "That doesn't mean much. They all use that phrasing now. So they can threaten people legally." He avoided my gaze. "You could try citizens' advice." I left the office shaking, fury mixing with helplessness. Outside, the rain had turned to sleet. I stood under an awning and tried not to cry. Around me, people hurried with umbrellas and takeaway coffees, lives moving faster than mine never would again. That was when a voice said, "Eleanor?" I turned. Aunt Lister, from my old book club, neat gray bob, sharp eyes, still carrying that aura of quiet authority. I hadn't seen her since Tom's funeral. "Good heavens," she said, taking in my expression. "You look frozen. Come with me. Tea first, explanations later." Anne's house was a small terraced miracle, warm, scented with cinnamon, lined with books. She was retired now, but once she'd been a solicitor. Over mugs of tea, I told her everything: Tom's death, the scam, the debts, the flat, even the new letter. She listened without interruption, only occasionally jotting notes on a pad. When I finished, she said, "You've been defrauded, Eleanor. Twice, by the sound of it. Richard Bell's kind are parasites, but they leave trails. I can help you follow one." "I can't afford, don't be ridiculous. You'll pay me in gossip and scones." For the first time in months, I laughed, a short, rusty sound. She leaned forward. "Do you still have all the paperwork?" "Every sheet," I said. I couldn't bring myself to throw it away. "Good. Bring it round tomorrow. We'll make sense of the nonsense." That evening, as I climbed the stairs above the laundrette, I felt something I hadn't in a long time, a thin, uncertain thread of purpose. The washing machines hummed below, their rhythmic churning rising through the floor like a heartbeat. I stood by the window, watching the city lights blur in the drizzle. It struck me that survival wasn't a single act but a series of small mercies, a neighbor's kindness, a stranger's patience, a friend's unexpected return. And maybe, just maybe, I wasn't done adding them up. Ghosts in the ledger. Anne's handwriting was precise and slanted, the kind that suggested a woman who'd never once missed a filing deadline. Her kitchen table became our command center, piles of statements, envelopes, photocopies of identification documents spread like battle maps. She tapped one page with her pen. See here? The account number used for the final transfer. It's not your bank's internal format. It's a holding account, probably offshore. That sounds impossible to trace. Not impossible, she said. Just slow. Which is why I retired before the system broke me. I smiled. I wish I'd retired before the world broke me. Anne poured more tea. You haven't broken, Eleanor. You've bent. That's different. Her confidence was something I could almost borrow for a few hours. She promised to contact an old colleague at the Financial Conduct Authority. I didn't expect miracles, but the thought of someone else sharing the burden made my chest loosen. Back in my flat, I sorted through the box of documents she'd sent me home with. The smell of old paper and dust filled the room. At the bottom was a folder I hadn't opened since before Tom died: our joint tax returns, insurance policies, his neat penciled notes in the margins. I found myself tracing his handwriting, the deliberate loops and tidy numerals. He'd been meticulous, almost proud of how organized he was. And yet he'd fallen for a man like Bell long before I had. Maybe we were both more alike than I'd realized, both so desperate to believe we were managing that we missed the cracks forming beneath us. The next day, I met Clara, my daughter, for lunch near her office. We hadn't spoken properly in months, short phone calls, polite text messages. She was always busy, though I suspected she was avoiding the strain of seeing me diminished. She arrived in her usual blur, expensive coat, phone in one hand, coffee in the other. "Mum, you look well," she said it like a question. "I'm surviving," I said. "That's the new definition of well." We ordered soup. The silence between us felt thicker than the air in the cafe. Finally, she sighed. "I'm sorry I've been distant. It's just. After Dad, everything was chaos. Then this fraud thing destroyed everything," I said, sharper than intended. Her eyes widened. "I didn't mean, I know." I took a breath. "But I need you to understand that it wasn't stupidity, Clara. It was loneliness. And trust. Misplaced, but real." She reached across the table, hesitated, then touched my hand. "I'm sorry, Mum. I just hate seeing you struggle." "I'm finding my feet again," I said. "I have a friend helping me, Aunt Lister. She thinks we might be able to track him." Something flickered in Clara's expression, a cautious hope, tempered by disbelief. "Do you think it's worth it?" I looked out the window, at people moving briskly under umbrellas, everyone with a destination. "Yes," I said. "Even if we never find him. I need to feel I tried." That night I dreamt of ledgers again, pages filled with Tom's handwriting, every number rearranging itself into Richard Bell's name. When I woke, my pillow was damp and the city outside was still black. I made tea and stood by the window, watching the laundrette's neon sign flicker through the rain. The world had grown smaller since Tom's death, but inside that smallness, I was learning to navigate again. A week later, Anne phoned. "Progress," she said briskly. "My contact found Bell's alias linked to a company dissolved last year. It used a London postal box. There's a chance he's still operating under another name. What can we do? Gather evidence. Every email, message, transaction record you can find. We'll make a dossier." Her tone made it sound almost exciting, like espionage. I found myself smiling despite the chill that ran through me. The thought of confronting him, even indirectly, both terrified and steadied me. Meanwhile, the laundrette's machines hummed and Priya hummed with them. She noticed the new energy in my step and teased me. "You've got that look, Mrs. Hayes. Like someone plotting world domination." "Only justice," I said. "Justice sounds more dangerous," she laughed, then handed me a cup of chai. "Drink. Fuel for the revolution." A few evenings later, I invited Anne to meet Clara at a cafe near the station. The two women regarded each other cautiously at first, my daughter's sharp professional poise against Anne's calm precision. Within minutes they were comparing legal procedures and insurance loopholes like old colleagues. Clara finally said, "If you need copies of Mum's old bank records, I can request them. I work with someone in compliance." Anne smiled. "That would be invaluable. You might be surprised how often bureaucracy bends when you know which string to pull." Watching them, I felt something shift. For months I'd been alone in the wreckage, but now two capable women were quietly building scaffolding around me. When we parted, Clara hugged me properly for the first time in years. "I'll help," she said. "We'll get him, Mum." Her voice carried a firmness that made me believe it. Back in my flat, I opened the window to let in the cool evening air. The laundrette below had gone quiet, Priya must have closed early. The silence felt peaceful instead of empty. I looked at the folder of papers on my table, messy, incomplete, but growing into a story I was finally ready to tell. The story of how I was deceived, yes, but also of how I had survived it. I picked up my pen and began to write the first line of a letter to the police fraud unit. "My name is Eleanor Hayes, and I have not finished being heard." The morning Anne called again, I was ironing shirts for one of Priya's customers. The hiss of steam drowned out most sounds until the phone's vibration rattled across the counter. "Eleanor," she said, breathless. "You'd better sit down." I did. "Is it bad news?" "Depends on how you define bad. We've got him, or at least, a new version of him." I gripped the phone tighter. "You've found Richard Bell?" A man matching his description opened an account in the name of Robert Blake, same date of birth, same handwriting on the forms. My contact flagged it. "He's still in the country." I stared at the window. Outside, laundry fluttered on the line like pale flags of surrender. "What do we do?" "I'll need you to confirm everything. Old signatures, communications, anything that ties him to that name. We can hand it to the police, but it'll take time." "Yes," she admitted. "And he's clever. He knows how to vanish." For a long time, neither of us spoke. Then Anne said quietly, "You're not powerless anymore, Eleanor. Remember that." That night I couldn't sleep. My small flat seemed too silent, every creak of the floorboards a whisper of ghosts. I tried reading, knitting, even rearranging the pantry, but my thoughts circled back to the same image, his face, the practiced smile, the calm voice that had promised to save me. Around midnight, I went out for a walk. The air smelled faintly of rain and detergent. The laundrette's lights were off, but Priya had left the back door ajar. Inside, the machines gleamed under dim bulbs. I stood among them, listening to the hum that lingered even after power down, a phantom vibration like memory itself. The next day, I met David at the cafe. He noticed my pale face immediately. "Didn't sleep?" he asked. "I found out Belle's still out there. Different name, same tricks." David's jaw tightened. "Then we stop him." The simplicity of his words startled me. No hesitation, no doubt, just certainty. "We?" I said softly. He smiled faintly. "I might not know the law, but I know people. And I can keep you company while you fight." It was such an ordinary kindness that my eyes stung. Anne arranged a small meeting with a retired detective she knew, a man named Harold Quinn, who smelled of tobacco and wore his cynicism like an old overcoat. We met in her office, papers stacked high, dust motes dancing in the late sunlight. "Seen his type before," Quinn muttered, flipping through Belle's forged documents. "Confidence man. Middle-class charm, the accent of trust. Probably thinks he's untouchable." "Is he?" I asked. He looked up, one eyebrow raised. "Not if you've got patience and proof." And handed him the folder we'd compiled, emails, bank records, even a photograph Priya had found on social media of Belle at a charity event under his alias. Quinn whistled softly. "You've done half my job already. Can we prosecute him?" I asked. "Eventually. But first, we track him." People like this can't stay quiet. They need new victims, and that's how they get caught. For the first time, I felt something like adrenaline rather than fear. Weeks passed. Life resumed its quiet rhythm: laundry, tea, walks with David, phone calls with Clara. But beneath the ordinary ran a thin current of anticipation. Every day brought some small update from Anne, another lead, another piece of evidence connecting Belle to new scams. One afternoon, while sorting old emails, I found something I'd missed before, a message dated months before the fraud, from a Robert B. recommending a financial advisor named Richard Bell. The same man, playing both sides of the conversation. Anne was thrilled. That's proof of premeditation. It shows he orchestrated the whole thing. She forwarded it to Quinn, who replied with a single line, "We're close." Meanwhile, David became a steady warmth in my life. We met almost daily, sometimes for coffee, sometimes just to walk. He had a way of talking about ordinary things: the price of bread, the weather, the old record store near the station, that made me feel like the world hadn't ended after all. One evening, he asked, "If you could go anywhere, start fresh, where would you go?" I smiled at the question. "Somewhere quiet. Maybe by the sea. But I think running away isn't what I need anymore." He nodded thoughtfully. "Then maybe the sea should come to you. We could take a trip. Just for a weekend." I hesitated. Part of me wanted to refuse, to retreat into safety. But something inside me stirred, the same flicker of daring I used to have before life became a series of losses. "Maybe," I said. "Maybe's a start," he replied. That night, I dreamt again, but this time not of ledgers or debts. I dreamt of waves breaking against the shore, of Tom's laughter carried on the wind, of a sense of peace that didn't feel borrowed. When I woke, the light through the curtains was golden. For the first time in years, the future didn't feel like a threat. It felt like a promise. The edge of the sea, the train rattled along the coastline, salt tang in the air, waves crashing in an endless rhythm below. Eleanor pressed her hand against the window, watching gulls dip and climb, the landscape flashing by in muted greens and grays. David sat beside her, reading a travel magazine with an occasional smile at photos of hidden coves and seaside towns. "I didn't realize how long it's been since I've seen the ocean," Eleanor said softly. "You don't see much of it from your laundry, do you?" David teased. She allowed a small laugh. "Not really. The carriage smelled faintly of coffee and upholstery polish." Eleanor's heart felt strange, a mixture of anticipation, fear, and something she hadn't felt in a long time: hope. For once, she wasn't thinking about Richard Bell or fraud or losses. She was thinking about the sea, and about David, and about life beyond ledgers and spreadsheets. By late afternoon, the train rolled into a small town framed by cliffs. The station was quaint, with peeling paint and a lone vendor selling postcards. Eleanor hoisted her small suitcase from the rack while David guided her toward the exit. "Let's find the inn," he said. "I think they promised a room with a sea view." The inn was a restored Victorian house perched on a cliff. Windows opened onto the waves, and flower boxes spilled over with bright blooms. The smell of salt and baked bread hit Eleanor first, and she inhaled deeply, savoring it. The innkeeper, a woman named Mrs. Hargrove, welcomed them warmly. "We've been expecting you. Your room overlooks the sea, just past the garden." As Eleanor stepped onto the balcony, the wind tugged at her hair. The ocean stretched endless and untamed, glittering under the late afternoon sun. The horizon seemed to promise something she hadn't dared to name: freedom. That evening, after unpacking, they wandered the cliffs. David talked about his childhood visits to the coast, about fishing trips and kite flying, while Eleanor listened and let herself relax. The constant tension in her chest had begun to ease. "You've been carrying so much," David said quietly. "You deserve this, a little escape, at least." "I didn't realize how heavy it was until now," Eleanor admitted. He glanced at her, eyes soft. "You're stronger than you think." Eleanor wanted to believe him, to let the weight of the past dissolve in the wind and the sea. She squeezed his hand. Over the next 2 days, they explored the town. They wandered narrow cobblestone streets, bought handmade jewelry, and ate fresh seafood at a tiny cafe overlooking the harbor. Eleanor began sketching again, the first time since she'd quit after Tom's death, drawing the boats bobbing in the tide and the cliffs that rose like silent sentinels. At night, they walked along the beach. Eleanor felt the sand between her toes, felt the cool waves lap at her ankles, and with every step, she imagined leaving the past behind. But part of her knew she couldn't entirely. Richard Bell was still out there, and Anne's messages reminded her that the chase had only just begun. On the third morning, a letter arrived for Eleanor. It was not from the inn, nor from David, but from Anne. She tore it open, hands trembling slightly. Eleanor, it read, "We've tracked him to a series of temporary residences along the coast. He's clever, but he's leaving a trail. We believe he's using a shipping business as a front. I need you to come back. This could be the break we've been waiting for." Eleanor felt a pang, the longing to stay, to finally breathe, clashing with the call of duty. She showed the letter to David. "We knew this might happen," he said, taking her hand. "You have to go, don't you?" "Yes," she said. Her voice was firm despite the ache in her chest. "But I don't want to leave. Not yet. I need to remember what life feels like without fear." David nodded. "Then we'll do one last morning together. Just us." That morning, they took a small boat to a secluded cove. The sea was a deep blue, waves gentle. Eleanor let the water wash over her fingers, letting go of the tightness in her chest. David watched her, quiet but steady, his presence a calm anchor. They spoke of trivial things, favorite childhood memories, books they loved, places they dreamed of visiting. Each word seemed to stitch together parts of Eleanor's heart she'd thought were lost. When the sun rose high enough to light the cove in golden brilliance, Eleanor turned to David. "Thank you. For everything." He smiled. "You don't have to thank me. Just remember this feeling. Remember that you're alive. And when it's over, come back to it." She nodded, a lump in her throat. "I will." Back in the town, Eleanor packed her bag. She hugged David tightly, feeling the solid warmth of his embrace. "Don't let me disappear from your life," she whispered. "You won't," he promised. "We've got a story together, Eleanor. This is just one chapter." The train ride back felt different. The sea faded into the distance, but a new strength had taken root inside her. She wasn't just a victim anymore, she was a participant in her own life, in her own story. When she returned to the city, Anne was waiting at the station. "We've got him," Anne said immediately. "He's at a shipping yard on the outskirts of town. He doesn't know we're coming." Eleanor felt the adrenaline spike again, the familiar rush she had once thought she'd never feel. But now it was tempered by something new, confidence. She knew what needed to be done. "Then let's end this," she said. The plan was meticulous. Quinn coordinated with local authorities, Anne handled logistics, and Eleanor provided everything they'd gathered over months: emails, records, even subtle behavioral patterns she had noticed in Bell's communication. As they approached the shipping yard, Eleanor felt a strange mixture of fear and clarity. She was facing the man who had taken so much from her, and yet, she no longer felt powerless. Through the chain-link fence, containers stacked like giant blocks, shadows moving inside. Quinn whispered instructions. Anne kept a tight grip on her phone, coordinating the raid. Eleanor took a deep breath. And then, among the crates, she saw him. Richard Bell. He looked older, wearier than in her memory, but no less cunning. His eyes flicked toward them, calculating, before he turned and started to retreat. "Now," Quinn said. Eleanor's legs moved of their own accord. She ran toward him, heart hammering. This was it, the confrontation that had been building for months, the moment where fear, courage, and justice collided. Perfect tension and drama. The confrontation. Richard Bell moved quickly through the narrow lanes between the towering stacks of shipping containers. Eleanor's pulse was in sync with the clatter of her boots against the concrete. Her mind raced, cataloging every step, Every decision he might make, months of research, of following his patterns, had led to this moment. Quinn and Anne flanked her, radios in hand, voices calm and precise as they coordinated with the local authorities. Eleanor's fingers brushed the small recorder she had tucked into her pocket, a precaution in case evidence was needed later. "He's heading toward the east exit," Anne whispered. Eleanor glanced ahead. The yard was labyrinthine. Each container cast long shadows, offering refuge for someone desperate to disappear. But she didn't feel afraid. Not really. Fear had driven her before, now determination fueled her. Richard paused, as if sensing pursuit. His eyes narrowed, scanning the perimeter, the way a predator scans the terrain. Eleanor slowed, calculating her approach. She needed him alive, not for revenge, but for justice. "Eleanor, stay back a bit," Quinn said. "We don't know if he's armed." She shook her head. "I can do this. I've been through worse." Anne hesitated, then nodded. "Just be careful." The wind shifted, carrying the faint metallic tang of the shipping yard and the briny scent of the nearby port. Eleanor moved silently, her body low, until she was within 20 feet of him. He was crouched near a container marked with peeling red paint, rifling through a clipboard and a set of keys. Richard Bell looked up suddenly, eyes locking on hers. For a moment, neither spoke. Time slowed. In that instant, Eleanor saw the man for who he truly was, brilliant, manipulative, but tired and frayed. Years of deceit had taken a toll on him, and yet, the core of cunning remained. "You've been following me," he said finally, voice low, almost a hiss. "I've been watching you," Eleanor replied evenly. "And now it's over." He smiled, a slow, calculated smile. "Over? You think you understand what I've done?" "Yes," she said, stepping closer. "And I know it's enough for the law to catch up with you." Bell's gaze flicked toward the exit. "You think they'll stop me? I've planned for every eventuality." Eleanor's pulse quickened, not with fear, but anticipation. She had anticipated this reaction. Every time he had tried to slip away before, there had been a pattern, arrogance paired with underestimation. He had never thought she would trace his movements with precision, never thought she would outthink him. "You underestimated me," she said quietly. "You always do," Bell laughed softly, then suddenly sprinted toward a narrow passage between two container stacks. Eleanor followed immediately, adrenaline coursing through her veins. She felt Quinn and Anne close behind. The passage narrowed, forcing her to sidestep containers and avoid scattered crates. Bell's footfalls echoed against the metal, a taunting rhythm. Eleanor could almost hear the months of deception, the stolen money, the lies, condensed into every hurried step he took. At the far end, Bell reached a chain-link fence topped with barbed wire. He fumbled with a lockbox, trying to break through. Eleanor slowed, assessing. This was the moment to confront him. She stepped into view. "Stop," she commanded. Bell froze, then turned, hands raised slightly. "Ah, Eleanor," he said. "You've come prepared. I must admit, I didn't expect." You should have," she replied. "You've had months to anticipate me, and yet here we are." He studied her face, then chuckled. "Impressive. But impressive doesn't save you. Or stop me. You're done," she said. "The authorities are just outside. You're not escaping this time." Bell's expression darkened, his mind racing. He glanced around, calculating options, but Eleanor noticed the hesitation, the faint crack in his confidence. A sudden noise, a clatter of metal from a nearby stack, made Bell flinch. Quinn's voice came through Eleanor's earpiece. "We've got perimeters secured. No exits." Bell's shoulders slumped slightly, realization dawning. Eleanor stepped closer, carefully, keeping her eyes locked on his. "You can't run anymore," she said. "But you can do the right thing now. Cooperate, and it'll be easier," he laughed bitterly. "Right thing? There is no right thing for me. Only survival." Eleanor's voice softened, but remained firm. "Survival doesn't have to mean hurting others. You've caused enough pain. Let it end here." Belle's eyes flicked to her hands, the calm yet resolute way she held herself. For a moment, the fierce, greedy energy that had driven him seemed to falter. "You've changed," he muttered. "I've underestimated you." "You've underestimated yourself," Eleanor said. "And the law. You're done." The sound of approaching footsteps and the faint hum of radios made the reality unavoidable. Richard Bell knew he had no options. With a resigned sigh, he dropped the lockbox and raised his hands. Eleanor stepped forward cautiously, keeping her distance. "Stay calm. Everything will be handled properly." As Quinn and Anne moved in, Belle's shoulders sagged. For the first time, Eleanor saw the human behind the mask of greed and cunning. He was just a man, frightened, cornered, and now powerless. The handcuffs clicked, sealing the end of months of pursuit. Eleanor exhaled, feeling a release that had nothing to do with victory over him, but everything to do with reclaiming her life. Back in the office of the local authorities, Bell sat quietly, no longer the charismatic manipulator he had once been. Eleanor handed over all her evidence, including the meticulous records she had kept. Quinn and Anne coordinated the formal charges, ensuring no loophole could free him again. "You did it," Anne said quietly. "Finally." Eleanor nodded, though her mind felt both exhausted and alive. "It's not just about catching him," she said. "It's about making sure this ends. For everyone he's hurt, including me." Quinn placed a hand on her shoulder. "You were incredible. The whole time. You didn't just help us catch him, you outsmarted him." Eleanor allowed herself a small smile. The months of fear, frustration, and grief had led to this moment. She had faced him, faced the past, and finally reclaimed her power. As she left the office later that evening, walking toward the fading light of sunset, Eleanor felt an unfamiliar calm. The city's chaos seemed distant, and for the first time in years, she felt a sense of completeness. She had survived, not just the threats of others, but her own self-doubt. The waves of emotion ebbed and flowed inside her, a quiet reflection of the ocean she had left behind. And in that moment, Eleanor knew, life wasn't about never falling, it was about rising each time, stronger, wiser, and unafraid. Perfect? The morning sunlight spilled over the city, painting the streets in muted gold. Eleanor walked slowly through the park near her apartment, her mind a jumble of relief, exhaustion, and lingering unease. Richard Bell was finally behind bars, yet she felt no triumph, only the quiet weight of what had transpired. David met her near the fountain, hands deep in his coat pockets. His face bore the tired expression of someone who had witnessed a storm and survived it, yet still carried the residue of fear. "You look different," he said softly, nodding toward her. "Calmer, somehow." Eleanor gave a small smile. "I guess the storm finally passed. For now." David studied her for a long moment. "It's not just that you caught him. It's that you faced him, and you didn't break." The words felt heavier than any congratulations. She nodded. "It doesn't feel finished." "Not really. He's gone, yes. But the aftermath of what he did is still here. For me, for others." David reached out, taking her hand gently. "Then we'll face it together. One step at a time." At the precinct, Eleanor and Anne reviewed the final evidence packages before submitting them to the prosecutor. Each file contained meticulous records, wire transfers, forged documents, detailed logs of Bell's movements. The authorities were thorough, leaving no room for him to manipulate the system. "I can't believe we finally caught him," Anne said, leaning back in her chair. Her voice held the mixture of exhaustion and exhilaration only people who had chased a predator could understand. Eleanor looked at her friend. "It wasn't just luck. We did it because we were methodical, patient, and smart. He underestimated us. All of us," and laughed softly. "Yeah, and underestimated you the most. You were brilliant, Eleanor. I mean, really brilliant." Eleanor felt warmth rise in her chest, a rare comfort after months of fear and frustration. It was the first time in a long while she had allowed herself to feel proud, not arrogant, just proud. The days following Belle's arrest were a blur of meetings, media attention, and the constant hum of bureaucracy. While Eleanor tried to maintain her normal routine, the weight of public scrutiny pressed against her. She knew the story would make headlines, the brilliant manipulator finally caught by the woman he had underestimated. At night, Eleanor returned to her apartment and often found herself staring out at the city lights, reflecting on how fragile life could be. She had faced a man who thrived on manipulation, deception, and greed. And she had survived, not just physically, but mentally, emotionally, and morally intact. One evening, a letter arrived at her door. No return address. She tore it open, hands slightly trembling. Inside was a single card with Belle's handwriting. "You've won this round. But remember, every story has another chapter. Be vigilant." Eleanor stared at it for a long moment, heart pounding. She had anticipated arrogance and defiance, but not this calm, eerily polite warning. It was as if he were testing her still, even from a cell. She set the card down, exhaling slowly. "I'm ready," she whispered to herself. Over the next weeks, Eleanor focused on rebuilding her life. Small things, cooking meals, reconnecting with friends, even volunteering at a local community center, brought her a sense of normalcy she had not felt in years. David remained a steady presence. Their conversations, once filled with tension and uncertainty, now carried warmth and honesty. They shared late-night walks, long discussions about hopes and fears, and quiet moments where no words were necessary. "I've missed this," David said one night, leaning against a railing as they watched the city skyline. "Me too," Eleanor replied. "It's strange. The world didn't stop when everything happened, but somehow, it feels like we're finally allowed to live again." Yet, even in these moments of calm, a part of Eleanor remained alert. Belle's letter was a stark reminder: while one battle was over, the ripples of his actions might continue. She could not afford to be complacent. One afternoon, while Eleanor was organizing files from her investigation, she noticed a discrepancy in Belle's financial records, something small, almost insignificant. But her instincts screamed that it could be a thread worth pulling. She called Anne. "I think there's more," she said. "I know he's in custody, but there might be others. People connected to him who haven't been caught yet." Anne paused, then replied, "You're probably right. He never acted alone. You think we should start digging?" Eleanor nodded. "Yes. If there are still pieces of this puzzle out there, I want to find them before anyone else gets hurt." It was the beginning of a new pursuit, not a chase through shadowy alleyways, but a methodical unraveling of the web Belle had spun across cities and industries. As she began mapping connections, contacts, and possible accomplices, Eleanor realized that the story wasn't just about catching a criminal, it was about reclaiming agency over chaos. Every lead she uncovered, every pattern she discerned, reminded her that she had not just survived. She had grown stronger. Late one night, Eleanor sat at her desk, a dim lamp casting warm light over the files spread before her. She paused, hands resting on the papers, heart steady but alert. "Whatever comes next," she said quietly to herself, "I'm ready. I won't let fear control me again." And somewhere in the shadows of the city, unseen but aware, someone else, someone who had benefited from Belle's schemes, watched, waiting for their opportunity. Eleanor didn't know it yet, but the next chapter of her life was about to begin. Eleanor's days blurred into nights as she delved deeper into the remnants of Belle's empire. The more she investigated, the clearer it became that his reach had been vast. Shadowy figures moved in corporate boardrooms, in political offices, and even among law enforcement, each connected by thin threads Eleanor now meticulously traced. One evening, as she cross-referenced emails and financial transactions, a pattern emerged, a network of shell companies funneling money to offshore accounts, some of which were tied to organizations known for laundering funds through seemingly legitimate charities. David leaned over her shoulder. "You've got him mapped out almost completely. But are you sure it's safe to chase this?" Eleanor didn't flinch. "If I don't, someone else will get hurt." Bell was just one node in a larger system. I need to see the whole network collapse. They decided to work with Anne and a small, trusted group of investigators. Together, they coordinated discreet surveillance, gathered evidence, and prepared to bring the remaining operatives to justice. It wasn't easy. Threats arrived, anonymous calls, shadowy cars following Eleanor, and subtle warnings that she wasn't alone. But each challenge only strengthened her resolve. One night, she discovered the central figure, a man named Victor Klein, Bell's former mentor and the architect of many of his schemes. Eleanor realized that catching Klein would finally dismantle the network and prevent future harm. Eleanor, David, and Anne planned carefully. They knew that Klein was cautious, calculating, and always one step ahead. Their approach had to be precise. They decided to lure him into a controlled environment under the guise of a lucrative investment deal. The night of the meeting, Eleanor entered a high-rise conference room, her pulse steady despite the adrenaline coursing through her veins. Klein was there, suave and composed, radiating confidence as if he had already won. "Eleanor Ward," he said, his voice smooth. "I've been expecting you." "You underestimated me once," Eleanor replied, "and you did it again. But this time, it ends tonight." Klein smirked. "Ends? Life doesn't end, Ms. Ward. It evolves. You think catching Bell stopped anything? I am far larger than him. Far smarter." Anne and David positioned themselves outside, ready to intervene if necessary. Eleanor calmly presented the evidence she had meticulously collected, financial records, testimonies, and digital footprints linking Klein to crimes spanning continents. For the first time, Klein's composure faltered. Eleanor noticed a twitch, a fleeting expression of fear behind the mask of control. "You think this is enough?" he asked, voice low, almost trembling. Eleanor leaned forward. "It is. You've already lost." Authorities, tipped off and waiting, moved in. Klein's empire crumbled in hours as law enforcement seized assets, froze accounts, and arrested key operatives. Bell had been only the beginning. Rebirth with Klein behind bars and the network dismantled, the city slowly returned to a fragile calm. Eleanor, David, and Anne watched the news coverage, observing the ripple effect of justice finally prevailing. For Eleanor, the victory was bittersweet. The journey had left scars, but it had also revealed resilience she didn't know she possessed. She realized that life, even after trauma, offered opportunities for growth, healing, and purpose. David joined her on a quiet evening walk. "What now?" he asked, hands in his pockets. Eleanor looked up at the city lights, a gentle smile forming. "Now, we live. We rebuild. And we stay vigilant. Not because we have to, but because we can choose to protect the world we care about." Anne visited soon after, bringing laughter and warmth back into their lives. Together, they reflected on the journey, the fear, the uncertainty, the small victories, and the ultimate triumph. Eleanor returned to her work, not as an obsessive pursuit of criminals, but as a careful guardian of truth and justice. She had faced darkness and emerged stronger, wiser, and more compassionate. One morning, as she opened her blinds to the rising sun, she noticed a small card slipped under the door. Expecting another threat, she hesitated, but it wasn't. It read simply, "For everything you've done, you've made a difference. Keep moving forward." Eleanor held it, letting herself feel the full weight of accomplishment and hope. The city stretched out before her, alive with endless possibilities. And for the first time in years, she felt a profound sense of peace. The battle had ended. The story was hers to continue, and this time, she would write it on her terms. Please subscribe to my channel and hit on the bell icon.